You're listening to For the Republic, a love letter to Star Wars animation.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Forging the Path, our Star Wars ranked series here on the For the Republic podcast feed. I am the guardian of this Jedi Temple, Andrew of the For the Republic podcast, here today for our second episode of Forging the Path. I really enjoyed how our last episode turned out. It was a very special episode for me because it focused on new beginnings in Star Wars, and that was the start of a new beginning for me personally. That was my last episode I recorded in my long time recording space, my really home I grew up in, or spent my adolescent years in, you could say. And now this is my first recording session here in this new apartment. And pretty soon we'll be recording our first episode of the main For the Republic podcast as well here in the new apartment, which is very exciting. But this week we are going to be getting a bit more topical with this show because we have a little show coming out soon on Disney Plus called Maul, Shadow Lord. We started this podcast back in 2022, going on actually over 4 years ago now at this point, to talk about Star Wars animation. It is titled A Love Letter to Star Wars Animation for a reason. We started this podcast to look back on the Clone Wars, to go through the Clone Wars and really just discuss the personal connections we have to the Star Wars franchise and why I've been saying for years that animated Star Wars is in fact the best Star Wars. And Maul Shadow Lord looks to be no different to that. There's so many things I can talk about with this show. I can talk about how great the trailers have looked, how strikingly awesome the animation style looks, and how I'm intrigued to revisit this character of Darth Maul again and see what his story is directly after Episode 3 and after the Clone Wars series, and see how that leads to him in Rebels and in Solo, and how that all ties together. And these interesting new characters, this new planet of Janix. I'm really excited for this show. But what do we like to do as Star Wars fans? We like to speculate on the familiar. We like to speculate on the things we know and how they can connect to these new things in Star Wars. So today we are going to be talking about my 5 characters that could show up and that I would like to see show up in Maul Shadow Lord. My dream Maul characters, if you will. This was an interesting list to make. To pull the curtain back a little bit, this was going to be the debut episode of this show. When I was first crafting the series, it was right around the time the first trailer for this show came out. And this was the episode that I decided to say, hey, I have this new idea for this show. I've been listening to a lot of Star Wars Ranked on Force Center recently. I want to do something similar to that. Let's talk about Maul here. But then it took a little bit more time, and I thought the First Steps episode was a very fitting first installment to this series. So now we're going to talk about Maul for our second show. These are characters that I think would make a good addition to Maul Shadow Lord, whether it be a recurring role or just a one-episode kind of role like how we saw done with the Bad Batch a lot of times, with characters like Cutler Quain or Commander Wolf or Hera, where they really only showed up in 1 to 2 episodes, but they were really impactful and they really used their returning legacy characters in a really compelling way. And I trust that the animation team will be doing the same thing if they decide to bring back any characters for Shadow Lord. We do know that Rook Cast from Clone Wars Season 7 and the Son of Dathomir comics is going to be in this show. So we already know of one returning character. But there are other characters from the realm of Star Wars animation who have ties to Maul that I think would make great additions to this show, whether they just be, like I said, for just a cameo appearance in an episode or a longer role throughout the season. What does kind of make me go pause on some of these picks is the fact that it seems like this show is going to be taking place primarily, if not entirely, on this planet of Janix. So it makes me think some of these wider galaxy characters might not appear or they might not have a integral role in the series. But I do think that there's room for these characters to appear in, and I would like to genuinely see how they would fit into the show, especially if we get multiple seasons of Shadow Lord as well. So if you are new here, if this is your first time listening to Forging the Path, we are going to craft the lightsaber around this character. And the first piece of the saber that we are building today, whether it be on the planet Ilum in the caves of the snowy caves of Ilum, or the glowing workshop on Batu, we are going to create this lightsaber together, put the pieces of the story together. We're going to start with my number 5. And this is another Dave Filoni favorite when you talk about Star Wars animation. For 10 years, we made the joke of, well, where is Barriss Offee after the Clone Wars happened? And then as I joked on this podcast, shortly after Tales of the Empire came out, and her fate was once again left pretty ambiguous, we were once again asking the question, where's Barriss? Barriss Offee is my number 5 addition for this. I was between her and a couple of my honorable mentions, but I decided to go with Barriss because I do think these Tales shows have been working to soft launch other series, or at least expand on characters that we were recently touching on, or we're going to be discussing further. Like with Morgan Elsbeth immediately after Ahsoka Season 1, she had her episodes in Tales of the Empire, and how I believe one of our characters from Tales of the Underworld is going to eventually play a role, whether it be in this show or another animated series. You will have to wait till later in this episode, because we are, in fact, going to be talking about that character. But Barriss, I think, would be so intriguing. We do know that this is going to be taking place about a year after the Clone Wars and after Revenge of the Sith. So this was probably still her as an Inquisitor. One of my, I don't want to say complaints about the Barriss episodes of Tales of the Empire is I feel like we didn't get too much of her as an Inquisitor before she saw the error of her ways and turned back to the light, and as we saw her as that wise healer. So whether this is Barriss still a part of the dark side and perhaps working with that one bird-like Inquisitor and Marok, or it's her returning to the light and being that early figure of what we believe is connected to the hidden path, I think Barriss showing up in the show would be very intriguing, because it gives us another answer of, where is Barriss? What's up with Barriss? Is she alive? Is she dead? What's she doing? I think that would be very intriguing to get her in the show, having her interact with Maul, go against Maul, potentially work with Devin, I think would be really cool as a result, and have that conflict. Have a character that did fall to the dark side, but then returned and came back to the light, I think would be very compelling. If Devin is going to be a character like we think she's going to be, where she starts off as a Jedi, works with Maul, and then potentially by the end of the season does fall and becomes his apprentice, Darth Talon, ? We still don't really know what that character's fate is going to end up being, especially since we don't know if this is going to be a one-season show or multiple seasons. These animated shows typically are multiple seasons, or at least 2 seasons. R.I.P. Star Wars Resistance. But we don't know yet for Maul. And I think the more this season plays out, we'll have a greater idea of if this is going to be a multiple season show, or if this is just going to be one single contained 10-episode season, which would make a lot of these returning characters a bit less possible, or at least it wouldn't be doing those characters a lot of justice if they only have these 10 episodes to work with. It's like, okay, we got to focus on our new characters. Maybe we don't have time to throw in a Barriss, or we have time to throw in this returning character, or this character we know, even if it would add to Maul's story. I just think Barriss would be really fun, and it's just another thing of, hey, we got her back in Tales of the Empire, and then we may have lost her, we may have not. Let's see her again. I know it's different in the timeline compared to where we see her at the end of Empire, or Tales of the Empire, I should say, but it would be fun to see her, whether it is as the Inquisitor, or whether it's shortly after returning to light. Because again, we really don't know when that second episode of Tales of the Empire takes place in the timeline. This would be fun to see. My number 4. We are 2 episodes in, folks, and we're already breaking rules. But it's my show, so it doesn't matter. The second piece of the saber today is actually two characters because I couldn't decide who to pick. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, we do know that Rook Cast, one of the Maul DeLoreans, is a part of this show. And Maul's connection to Mandalore, the ending of Clone Wars Season 5 as well, when he takes over Death Watch. Some of the best parts of the Clone Wars series, The Lawless, as I've said for years now, is still, in my opinion, the best episode of the entire Clone Wars series. I think it is the best Maul story, perhaps the best Obi-Wan Kenobi story as well. It is a masterpiece of Star Wars storytelling. And they really did a lot to build off of the Mandalorian culture in Rebels. Really, before we even got the Mandalorian, Rebels did an amazing job of showcasing the clans on Mandalore during the Imperial era. And we are focusing on two of those characters here, one of which did make a cameo in Clone Wars Season 7. The other one, I believe, is just only in Rebels. But I would like to see both of these characters. Ursa Wren and Fen Rao are two really great characters in Rebels. Fen Rao starts off as an antagonistic character, eventually joins the side of the Ghost Crew in the retaking of Mandalore that we see in Season 3 and 4, I believe. And then Ursa Wren is the mother of Sabine Wren, one of my favorite Star Wars characters of all time. So I would love to see both of them together, get that Mandalorian connection, have it be from these two different Mandalorian clans that opposed Maul's rule, perhaps, or maybe Fen Rao at this point supported Maul's reign. I would like to see how they feel, and just have that ghost of Mandalore's past come back to haunt and confront Maul. I think would be incredibly compelling. And it's two characters, like you could go with obviously Bo-Katan or even Gar Saxon, because he was also a part of Maul's Maul DeLorean group. But I mean, the late great Ray Stevenson is no longer with us, so they would have to recast, and they could be cheeky and have Rory McCann play that character too, since he is taking over for Baylan Skoll in Ahsoka Season 2. I think that would be a fun little way to pay tribute to Ray there. But I want to go with these two characters because, one, it does give us another Rebels connection there, especially how in Bad Batch we had the connection with the Syndulas and a young Hera showing up. It would be fun to see Ursa have a prominent, or at least a couple episode role in this series, and maybe see a young rebellious Mandalorian in there at some point. But I would love to see these two symbols of Mandalore come back and confront Maul, either opposing him or working with them. And these are two characters I just want to see again. Fen Rao I thought was such a fun character in Rebels. Rebels is such a compelling case of getting these characters that start as villains and turn into heroes. Obviously, Agent Kallus is the one we think of the most, but Fen Rao is another one where we see him. He starts a bit villain. Bo-Katan, even though she's a full-on protagonist at this point, when we see her in Clone Wars, she's a villain. She's a part of Death Watch, who are very much a terrorist antagonistic group in their appearances. So I would love to see these two show up and really spotlight other sides of Mandalore, which I think would be really fun, and I would love to see these characters show up and work with or oppose Maul in the show. I think these would be really, really fun episodes. And it's not something to where I don't think you would need to be like, oh, well, now I have to go back and watch Rebels because I don't know who these characters are. They made it work in the Bad Batch, where characters that we know show up in Rebels and show up in Clone Wars appear, but you don't need, it doesn't feel like you need to do homework to know who these characters are, to recognize their story. And yes, if you're watching Shadow Lord, you've probably seen Clone Wars. You've probably seen Rebels. But if you haven't, you've probably seen the Bad Batch. But if you haven't, I don't think it's going to make your enjoyment of this show any less exhilarating. You have any less fun with this show. I think that the animation team has done a really good job at making it feel like you can enjoy these shows without feeling like you need to have watched them. Like, does watching Clone Wars before you watch Rebels make Rebels more fun knowing those moments? Well, yes, but if I didn't watch Clone Wars, I still feel like I'd enjoy those Ahsoka episodes. I'd enjoy Rex as a character. I'd enjoy seeing Hondo Ohnaka again. Which Hondo is another one that now I'm thinking about this now. I'm like, man, I probably should have found room for Hondo on this list because it has been so long since we've seen Hondo again. I really thought we could have seen him in Bad Batch again. So maybe include Hondo as an honorable mentions because I don't have him on my honorable mentions. But again, I think it would be fun. And again, these aren't like major characters where like, oh my god, who is this Fen Rao guy? I think you could just throw him in an episode and it would be a fun nod to people who know who the character is. And I think it would be a fun time. Number 3 is probably many people's number 1 because I have seen this discussed and theorized about since this series was announced. Is, well, are we going to see these two characters duel? Is Maul going to duel this character, go up against this character? Two titans of the dark side of the Force going at it. I'm, of course, talking about Darth Vader himself is my number 3. He is the third piece of the saber as we are starting to finish up crafting the hilt of this lightsaber that we are building here on Forging the Path. And yeah, I thought about making Vader my number 1. I really did. And my number 1, honestly, still, I'm like, is this my number 1? But the more I think about it, I'm like, yeah, this is my list. This is a very personal number 1. This is number 1 that I've been vouching and advocating for years. So you'll see that when we get there. But yeah, this is another one of those, like, oh my god, Darth Vader and Darth Maul dueling together. That would be so fun. Like, it's one of those nerd out moments. But it would also be really, really cool to see. I don't know if I need this in particular. Like, if this doesn't happen, I'm completely cool with it not happening. If it doesn't even get hinted at, I'd be like, cool. If it does happen, and it takes away from what I think is, like, really compelling stuff on Janix, I'm like, well, we gotta shoehorn in this Vader thing. If that's how they work it in, I'd be like, I don't really know if I want this. But the prospect of it, the idea of it, is very, very tantalizing as a Star Wars fan. Because of course it is. It's Maul and Vader going at it. It's one of those playground, schoolyard conversations. Well, what if Prime Darth Maul went up against Prime Darth Vader? Who would win? And the answer is obviously Vader would dogwalk Maul. Mainly due to Maul's biggest enemy being Maul himself. And I think that's going to be a great theme of this show, is how do you combat fighting fascism, fighting oppression, while also being motivated entirely through hate and anger and these dark side emotions. That's going to be very compelling to see compared to what we've seen in Rebels and the Bad Batch and Andor, of fighting the Empire through the lens of a dark side character, an antagonist. That's the one of the few very, very many things I'm excited about for this show. But there are things that make you think this could happen. When Vader is mentioned to Maul in Rebels Season 2, he seems to sense fear, like maybe he's encountered him before and it didn't go well. We know that Palpatine is out there, knowing Maul is there at some point and kind of letting his cute little Shadow Collective thing happen, but also knowing at any point if you want to go in there and stop it and put an end to it, he very much can, and he can send his muscle, his dragon, to do so. And I think it would be cool. We've already had Kenobi handle, the rematch of the century, getting to see Vader and Kenobi go at it earlier than we thought they would or ever did in the past. So yeah, even though we've never heard about any duel between Vader and Maul in canon before, they could very much make it happen, and I would be all for it. I think it would be a really fun episode, a way to really have this be the finale is, oh, well, here comes Vader and Maul's about to get his shit rocked. I think that would be a really fun season finale or perhaps series finale if it all leads to all roads lead to Vader. I think it would be really fun. Again, there are certain ones where I'm like, oh man, this would be really cool to add to Maul's character and his background, like with the two Mandalorian entries. Or like Barriss, where it's just a character that I like seeing appear more in Star Wars animation. I think it would work. It would be a character that we've never seen interact with Maul before, and I think it would be really fun. Vader is just, no, this is just two kids on the playground talking about Star Wars characters they'd like to see fight, like to see duel and a lightsaber fight, and this is one of those entries. I'm allowed to have one of them. I love talking about the nuance and the deeper moments of Star Wars as much as everyone. But sometimes it's just as cool as lightsaber go burr. I want to see lightsaber go burr. And this is that entry here. Again, if it doesn't happen, I'm totally okay with it. It might happen, and I might be like, I would have maybe not done that. But I think, like I said, the prospect of it, the concept, the idea of it is so juicy and so cool, for no better word, is just enough to put it here. I didn't want to put it at number 1, though, because, again, I am more mixed about it than some are. So I think number 3 is a nice alternative there. And now we are getting to our number 2 spot. We are crafting the hilt of this saber. We only have the Kyber crystal left. And our number 2 is very similar to our number 3 in terms of it's 2 characters I'd love to see go at it. But I think this one is more likely. I think this one fits with the story we're trying to tell here a bit more. And it's one that I would, out of all 5 of these entries, it is the one that I feel the most confident in that we could see this character appear in the show. I hinted at it earlier. I'm talking about Asajj Ventress. Ventress, I talked about how I felt that her appearance in Bad Batch Season 3 and Tales of the Underworld was kind of soft launching of a future Ventress series, potentially focused on her with the Hidden Path and her new friend / apprentice / protege, Lyco Strata, that we see in Tales of the Underworld. So I guess you could include Lyco in this entry as well. And I still believe that's going to happen, but I also do think that Ventress is going to be showing up in this series as well. Maybe not a focal point, but I do, especially if this goes multiple seasons, I see her playing a clear role in this series. Because, again, they are 2 characters with very similar pasts. Both Sith apprentices, both were betrayed and thrown aside by their masters. Both were consumed by anger and rage and hatred, but Ventress found light through love and eventually lost her life, but then found a new purpose, you could say, being reborn, getting that second chance at living again. Maul cheated death in we all saw him get cut in half in the Phantom Menace, and next thing we know, he's back with spider legs in the Clone Wars, and he's all angry and consumed by darkness. They really went in 2 separate paths. We've seen these characters cross paths before. At the end of Clone Wars Season 4, we had that awesome duel where Obi-Wan teamed up with Ventress against Maul and Savage Opress. So you could work off of that. And again, Ventress, like we said, is a character, like I mentioned with Barriss, where it's that contrast with Devin, where we see a character start off on the light side, go to the dark side, although in Ventress's case, end up a part of the dark side for way longer than Barriss was, and then turn to the light, find purpose, have a second chance, and really start to atone and start anew. And where we think she's going is potentially helping out with the Hidden Path eventually and making her way back to Quinlan Vos. And I think having Maul be a roadblock in that story would be very, very cool. We are big fans of Ventress on this show. Longtime friend of the show, Katrina Dennis. Every single time Ventress comes on our Star Wars TVs, we will have them on the show to talk about Ventress. I'm sure it'll be no exception. If Ventress shows up in Shadow Lord, we'll have our friend back on for that one. But again, it's like if the Vader entry and the Barriss entry had a baby, is how I feel about Ventress. I think it's very likely. We do often get both teases to what's coming next and also returning characters from previous shows returning in these new animated series. And I think if I had to place bets on any character returning, it would be Ventress showing up My number one is just one that I've wanted for so long, and I don't see any reason why they won't do it. But I do think Ventress and Maul would work really well. I think Ventress and Devin would have some really cool scenes together, and very compelling, thought-provoking scenes as we see this character. We're going to really see the impact of how does a Jedi work with a character like Maul, who is so entrenched in the dark side long term. How does that affect your psyche? Can you come out on that completely still on the light? Or is the dark side just too powerful, or even being around it for that long will corrupt you in some way, shape, or form? That I'm very excited to see, and see how she ends this series, where she's going to be. Is she going to be a full-fledged apprentice to Maul? Is she going to be still on the side of the light? And are they going to end up being adversaries at some point during the show? I'll be very intrigued, and I think Ventress being a mediator to that, or someone playing both sides or trying to influence one or the other, I think would be very, very, very awesome. And just seeing how her growing role at this point in the timeline, and Maul potentially get in the way of the hidden path, that would be really cool. Maul interacting with Quinlan Voss. Again, there are some very compelling, tantalizing ideas at play here. And I would love to see Ventress show up. And again, out of all these 5 I've considered, I would say I'm still not fully convinced she's going to show up, especially if it's just one season. But it's the one I'm the most confident in that this character will make an appearance. But now we get to the end of our list. Number 1, we have forged the hilt of the blade, but now we are here. We gotta pick the Kyber crystal, and what's calling to us but a crystal that has been bled a deep crimson red. And Maul as a character, fear, anger, suffering, all applies to Maul. The fear of losing power, of losing life, the anger of everything around him that consumes him, fuels his dark side, fuels his actions, are all led and bred and influenced by anger and rage and suffering of not just those around him, but himself. Because he can't get over the hump. Every single time he thinks he's reached the top, he gets knocked back down the hill again. But let's get to some honorable mentions before we talk about our top entry. And speaking of anger, speaking of grabbing onto power like it's nobody's business, we got to talk about our boy Sheev Palpatine here for a second. I think it's a possibility Palpatine shows up, kind of just from a distance, maybe observing, maybe feeling the need to pull a Lawless again and knock him down a peg or two. Maybe that's why he ends up stuck on Malchor. But I feel like we're not going to reach the Solo part of the timeline yet, which is why I don't have Kira on this list as much as I would love to see Kira in this show. I just don't think it's going to match timeline-wise with what we know. But Palpatine's always an option, especially when we have these dark side-led shows like Shadow Lord. And he showed up in Bad Batch. He showed up in every animated show except for Resistance so far. So I feel like Palpatine's always an option. Similar to how we had characters from Clone Wars show up in the Bad Batch, similar to how we had characters from Clone Wars show up in Rebels. How about characters from the Bad Batch showing up in Maul, Shadow Lord? And I'm, of course, talking about Clone Wars 99 themselves. I don't think this is likely. Maybe we could see Omega. Maybe we could see the Batch. But I feel like we're not going to see them just yet. I think they are more likely to appear if we do get that Hidden Path show eventually. I think that's where they're more likely to make their return. But I would never say no to more Clone Force 99. They are some of my favorite characters, and I adore that show so much, and their ending is just so beautiful. And I would love to see them again. I am adoring these comics, and I can't wait to read Sanctuary. It is on my shelf right now. I love the Bad Batch, and I love how they're continuing on in other mediums. I would love to see them here again. I'm sure we're going to see them again in the future. I just don't know if it's here, especially if it's a one-season show. Obi-Wan is another one I considered, but I don't know if I want this. I would more want this if it's like we maybe see him on Tatooine separate from Maul, and we see him sense him or something like that. I don't know if I want another duel, because I just think their duel in Rebels is so perfect, especially if it's from the Clone Wars till then was the first time they've seen each other since then, and that's how Maul's story ends. But again, if it means we get to hear Sam Witwer scream Kenobi again, I guess I'm okay with it. I briefly mentioned Bo-Katan during the tie number 4 edition of this list. It's possible it's a more direct reference to the Siege of Mandalore arc there. Ahsoka's another option. I just think we've seen Ahsoka in a lot. And again, I think they showed great restraint in not including Ahsoka in the Bad Batch when they really could have. Very easily, honestly. So she's always an option there. But Bo-Katan, I think, is another. If you want to go with the Mandalorian option, Bo-Katan, more recognizable character. And I'd love to see Darksaber versus... I guess Bo-Katan and Maul at that point does still have the Darksaber. So I would just love to see these two go at it again. But I just think the Fen Rao / Ursa Wren combo, I think, is more... It's more what I'd like to see. And then Commander Cody. He had the great episode in Bad Batch Season 2. He dipped, and we never saw him again. I don't think it's the last we're going to see of him. I'd love to see him pop up here again. I think it would be fun to have some clone connections while not directly having... say, the Bad Batch themselves or Rex. And I think Cody would be fun here in a more, like, on the run. Maybe he ends up on Janix and he has an encounter with Devin or an encounter with Maul. I think that would be really fun. But my number one, I've talked about the dark side. I've talked about the Sith. And we're going in a completely different direction here. Because what's the other thing Maul is known for at this point? Him being a crime lord. Running the Shadow Collective. And of course, as we get to Solo... running and being the mastermind behind Crimson Dawn. And we're getting a lot of Solo Star Wars story love in my first 2 editions of this show. As it should be, we are all about spreading the love of that movie here on For the Republic. But my number one is personal. Because this is a character we know. They have an animation model just sitting around. We saw it in Clone Wars Season 7. And they've never used it again. So, of course, my number one is Dryden Voss. Because, I mean, come on. Like, there's no reason this wouldn't happen. If we know the Shadow Collective is a thing, we know at this point Crimson Dawn is at least a thing. Because we see Dryden Voss in that hologram in Clone Wars Season 7. My mind just tells me with how much work went into making those models. Like we saw in the early seasons of the Clone Wars, where certain characters just were not included because they did not have the assets to make models for those characters. Or thought it was too expensive, so they just palette swapped certain things. And that's how we had some of those background characters, or characters we know had full-fledged models created, but just never saw the light of day in Clone Wars, like Revan, like Darth Bane. I just, come on. Like, if he's there, we see him. We need to see him again. Whether it's Paul Bettany's beautiful voice reprising the role, or it's someone else that would do a wonderful job. We know we're getting connections. We know Pikes are in the series. Why not have Crimson Dawn in there? The early versions of Crimson Dawn, I think, would be really fun. Like I said, I showed restraint not putting Kira on this list because I just don't think the timeline adds up. Dryden Voss, however, the timeline is there, and I think getting to see the early days of Crimson Dawn, getting to see how Maul forms or takes control of this group, works with them, adds them to the Shadow Collective, I think would be really cool. Potentially seeing their presence on Janix and just seeing this character show up again. Finally, again, it's been way too long. But again, it's like, you can't convince me that they went through all the work for that, 15-second cameo in a hologram in one scene of the final season of Clone Wars. Like, you can't. Because, like, it just makes sense to me. Like, Trace and Rafa showed up in that entire arc of the Clone Wars, and then what do you know? They show up in the Bad Batch again because we got the models for them. I just think it makes too much sense for trying to show up in this series. Like Ventress, I think that's the most likely. I think it's the most compelling for the story. Vader, I think the concept is too cool to not at least have in the top half of the list. But Dryden Voss, it's personal because I love the Solo movie so much. I think Crimson Dawn is such a intriguing antagonistic group. I think Dryden Voss is such a compelling villain, an underrated villain in Star Wars. I just love Paul Bettany being an absolute freaking sinister asshole in that movie. One of his better performances, in my opinion, especially compared to like how kind he is as Vision, and just seeing the exact opposite of with him as Dryden Voss. And I want to see this character again. I just do. There's no reason for me to believe that he won't show up again in the future, just because why would you go through the pain of making those asses if they're not going to have the character show up in something again? It just doesn't make sense to me. So that is my number one here. We need more Crimson Dawn stuff. I've loved what they've done with them in the comics. I've loved that they've continued to have Kira show up in the Return of the Jedi era, but give us something here. Give us before Solo. I would love to see that. And this show is all about Maul, his anger, and continuing his criminal enterprise. And what better way to do that than to show one of the many branches of the Shadow Collective and the front-facing leader of Crimson Dawn himself, Dryden Voss. I think this would be a no-brainer, in my opinion, for what we could have in Maul Shadow Lord. Well, we have completed the crafting of this week's saber. The characters we would love to see in Star Wars Maul Shadow Lord as we ignite that red blade here together. And thank you for joining us for another fun edition of Forging the Path. I'm going to try and do this every 2 weeks. I think it's been very fun to come up with these lists. It really gets me thinking. It gets me motivated to keep coming up with ideas, and I like that. I've had a lot of fun with this show so far, and I hope you guys are as well. Who are characters that you would like to see show up in Maul Shadow Lord? Your dream legacy characters that you would like to see make an appearance in the upcoming series. Let me know in the comments if I didn't talk about them at all. And I hope you guys are excited for this series as I am. You can follow me on all socials at Starlight Andrew, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, and TikTok at Starlight Andrew. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at For the Repub Pod, on Instagram and TikTok at For the Republic Pod. We're going to have our new episode coming soon. We're going to be talking about the Battle of Geonosis arc of the Clone Wars Season 2. That is going to be very fun. And of course, April's coming up, which means our coverage of Maul Shadow Lord is almost here. We're going to be reviewing every episode here together and discussing the show. Cannot wait for more animated Star Wars in the very, very near future. I can almost taste it. So thank you once again for joining us for another edition of the Forging the Path. And until next time, take care, and may the Force be with you always.